extra money in that contract.
We actually did all right on it.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't make as much as we thought we were
Yeah.
gonna make, but we didn't run in the red on it either. We hadn't expected that many airplane trips, which,
Yeah.
you know, it becomes expensive, but the data was good. The keyers, bless their hearts, did really well. And we left some volumes in every place and then brought them all together. And we've converted a lot of fascinating stuff. We did the case law for Germany, the Staudinger. We did the Slovakian Parliament. We've done work
Now,
with.
how have you gotten in touch with all these folks? Do they just wander up to you at ACES or SLA and say,
Well, a lot of them contact us, but we do have, we have continued to do a lot of exhibiting at different meetings.
exhibiting? Yeah.
Although I haven't done any really for the last 2 years, because I'm not sure that that's the way to market anymore. I think that social and internet marketing is the way to go, and we are doing that. But it isn't, you know, social media I don't think is the way, but I think making your presence known through other means like the blog and authoritative papers and so on are useful.
Well, back to ACES. Why have these folks left? Is it because the academics came in and began to dominate the ACES meetings?
I think the
and
intellectual
membership?
rigor is not there to the level that it used to be, which is a pretty damning thing to say, I
Yeah.
suppose, to a bunch of academics. But it's because it's become very insular, and I am fortunate. I think that I am widely respected and liked within ACES, and if I say something, people listen to it. But if you're somebody else and you come in, if you don't have or aren't working on a doctorate in information science, you're thought of, I think you're thought a little less of, and by the same token, the people that are really ACES customers, those that are trying to implement information science and make things happen, aren't coming to our meeting anymore because they aren't hearing things that, like I did early on, that they can apply in their everyday life. I can remember people talking about one project or another that I would be able to apply. I remember an early paper by Doug Ord, actually, on cross-language retrieval. It was absolutely fascinating. He was spot on, and it was stuff that I could apply. I mean, I had a thorny little issue with the European Parliament at the time. It had the Office of Official Publications of the European Union has a thesaurus called Eurovoc, which is in 27 languages, several character sets, Greek, Cyrillic, English, and extended Latin. And it was a thorny issue that I hadn't quite come up with the right solution for it. And in that paper by Doug, there it was, the nugget I needed to make it happen. And when you go to meetings and you hear those kinds of nuggets, you keep coming back. You know, you keep wanting to hear another nugget that you could apply. And I know that the U.S. government badge people, the CIA and NSA and even FBI used to come a lot to our meetings and listen in. They were the middle row.
I don't think they come anymore.
They don't come anymore because they're not hearing that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, the Office of Research and Development for the CIA, Bill Aldershot used to come to all the meetings, and he'd always glean something.
Yeah.
But he's not gleaning anything from those meetings anymore. I think the topics are just not applied.
What year did ACES give up having exhibits, and why?
I think about we have to look that up.
You were president in '94.
I was, and we didn't have exhibits anymore in
Okay,
'94.
yeah.
I think they probably gave them up in the early '80s.
Early '80s?
Yeah.
What must have been a considerable economic impact on
Yeah,
on
Sam
the
Beatty was
society.
the executive director when we gave him up. It was before Dick Hill's time. And I'm not sure who was president or what all happened, but I know that, actually, it wasn't far off from the time that Wiley had to bail us out.
Right, right.
Because the fiscal management had been a challenge, I think, and ACES stopped.
This is just after the Eric CLIS fiasco also.
Yep,
And,
those were also very interesting times.
yeah.
And you could come to ACES and get the real gossip. Not true anymore. I mean, you know, if you wanted industry gossip, man, ACES was the place to be.
Yeah.
And for those of us that are trying to make our living in it, that's
Yeah, I
important.
haven't seen government folks there
No.
much at all.
No,
So
well-
I joined, first meeting was '94,
Uh-huh.
when you were president. And I remember a few being there, but now you seldom, if ever, run across any of those.
Yeah, I don't think there was, well, check, I do comb through those registration lists for ACES every year to
Mhm.
see what the
Yeah.
percentages are
Yeah.
like. I really don't go to ACES for business anymore, and I don't go to ACES for ideas, which is too bad.
Yeah.
And my company indexes the bulletin, and we index the journal for ACES, and we produce the proceedings for ACES. So we still, although there isn't really a publications committee anymore, I do produce all those things, and I told Sam Hastings when she was president that I'd get a digital library for her by the end of the term, and we did. Got it done. And so I have a real good idea of what the publications are like, and we also index Arist, although Arist is, I don't know, changing in its complexion.
Yeah.
But the journal also used to have an applied section that Lois Lennon would usually edit, and then whoever was the editor of the journal would make sure that it was very much applied, and it's varied over the years. I mean, I don't really think of it as a precision and recall journal anymore, although for a while I really thought that's what it was about. But it's not, really doesn't have a lot to do with search anymore.
Well, what were the issues during your time on the board and as president? Any significant ones?
Well,
that-
finance and fiscal stability was something that we faced pretty early on in my early tenure on the board. And I was fortunate to be on the finance committee with Buzzy Bash, who has got a very keen fiscal mind. I think people don't necessarily know what Buzzy does exactly, but
Other
I
than
can tell
run
you
his
that.
subscription company?
Yeah, but I can tell you that he can read a financial statement like nobody else.
Yeah.
He's just
He still
incredible.
comes to the business meeting.
Yeah.
I was at it the other day. And
Because I'm not bad at reading a finance statement, and I know that Dick Hill used to dread it if Bonnie Carroll, Buzzy, and I would be sitting together in the back, because he knew he had to know his numbers, because sure shooting we'd question him on them, and we did. I mean, but that's what the meeting was for.
Yeah,
And we did manage to get ACES stabilized. And now it's with the Information Architecture Summit, which I think is the exciting meeting now for the society, and it's also where the lion's share of our revenue comes from, because that's the happening meeting. You know, the annual meeting is kind of the
well, for academics.
the academic world, whereas the mid-year meeting, the Information Architecture Summit is very exciting. That's where new ideas are coming forth. That's where you'll see people who are implementers instead of academics, people really interested in implementing information science. And they party late, like we used to party at ACES, and so you drink and you laugh, and then you talk some serious implementation stuff, and whether it's search, precision recall, accuracy levels for data, how you really index something so that people can pull it out again, whether you want to use ranking or weighting or some other measure in figuring out what kinds of stuff ought to come out first in retrieval, all that stuff. I don't hear it anymore. I really don't. I don't hear that. I hear about some social issue stuff, and, social issues are important, but it's not what drags
They're
in
not
people
implementing
after.
information systems and
Usually not.
testing them and
Yeah.
reporting on it, huh?
Yeah. It's not keeping up with Google. It's not trying to figure out is Endeca better than Lucene and why? That kind of stuff just doesn't happen.
Speaking of Google, an enduring question in my mind is, how did we lose out when we were doing all these things that Google later did in terms of retrieval, search rank and online stuff and all that, and yet information science people don't get any credit for any of those kinds of things.
Now, Gene Garfield gets credit, as he should,
Yeah.
but because he's really the father of bibliometrics. But how long since you heard a bibliometrics talk at ACES?
No, there are some, not
But
many.
not many.
Kate
Yeah.
McCain.
Kate McCain will do one on occasion, and others, and those are usually good conversations, but by and large, you aren't hearing them. So,
But I mean,
Kevin.
we had all this vocabulary stuff that we worked on for years and years, thesauri, et cetera,
Do you know the classification
stuff.
research meeting this year was all classification? It wasn't thesauri, it wasn't taxonomies, it wasn't authority files, it was classification, which isn't so broadly used anymore. Numeric sequences and so on. So it was a surprise to me that that's what they were talking about. But it's probably comfortable. I think maybe some people talk about things that are comfortable to them. And, to some extent, if you're on the cutting edge or bleeding edge, it's uncomfortable. It's not always an easy place to be.
Interestingly enough, at our history pre-conference, we did have close to a third of the papers were on classification.
See?
So viewing it historically,
Yeah.
still an important issue, but yeah.
Well,
Classification and related kinds of things, I should say, about, thesauri, et cetera. But,
And sorry I couldn't attend that, but I was glad to be home and not
yeah.
cooling my heels for a
It was
week
a
in the
good
storm.
Okay, so no major problems that you recall during the time you were on the board?
Well, when I
Except
I lost to Yosei, and then I was convinced to run a second time for president. So I wasn't elected the first time I ran. I lost by only a few votes reportedly, but I didn't win. And but I had been real active in this strategic realignments thing, and on a committee for that under Ann Prentice with Ann, and Dan Robbins was particularly leading that effort, and helping us shepherd it through. But I was the one that was tagged as the person to implement these changes. So as we were really lucky, I think, ACES was, that we had Ann Prentice, Yosei Marie Griffiths, and then myself as a presidential string. And during that time, we completely revamped ACES and its organization. There had been a move afoot to try to reclassify the SIGs into 6 by subject areas. And man, that was a ton of bricks being dropped on some very unhappy people. So it didn't happen, and I think it's probably just as well it didn't. And then we followed up in the following years trying to realign ACES, because we'd had a tremendous amount of calcified committees. I mean, we had committees that had been around for 20 years and nobody knew what anybody did anymore, and they were overlapping each other, so try to make it very clear. So when I was president, we cleaned up the committee structure. Then I was followed by Jim Rush, and he was followed by Cliff Lynch, and those two guys finished out the job. So we started it when I was chair of strategic planning under Ann, and then Yosei called me up when she won and said, "I can't do this without you, Margie." I said, "Okay, well, I'll fold my wounded feathers and and be helpful, and then I was elected the next year. So we were able to do this 5-year-long reorganization of ACES where everybody bought into the plan from the beginning, because Cliff and I had been on Ann's board and then finished off with Cliff, so Cliff Lynch.
Oh.
So implementing that plan went very smoothly. It was very nice that we were able to do that. So with that, we were able to get ourselves in a pretty clean footing. Dick Hill was a very able administrator and didn't want to get in the way of information science. So he felt and I think has always felt that his job is to run the organization. He's really the chief operations officer, and he makes that platform solid so that other people can get their agendas through when they're on the board. And he's maintained that, done really well. We've been lucky to have him, I think. Not everybody agrees with me, but I think he's been good for ACES. And now it's a small gang, but it runs very smoothly, and most of its staff has been there like 16 or more years. It's really amazing for an association to hang on to association personnel that long in Washington, D.C. area, which is constantly swiping people from each other. I mean, they just do it weekly, I swear.
Why do you think membership continues to decline now?
Because the vibrancy isn't there. I mean, we're back to the, what do I get out of ACES? What am I going to learn from ACES? What can I take home from the meeting that I can apply in my daily work? And, okay, so I forwarded the future of my doctoral students. I gave another paper, which will be good for my career as a promising academic. I gave a paper because that'll help me get tenure as an academic. Did you hear anything about how I did a really cool project and that can be applied? It was applied here in this scholarly publisher, and it could be applied in 5 others. You just don't hear those papers there anymore. And you know, and then the industry has had this love affair with the semantic web. SGML was not implementable unless you had very deep pockets, because it was very complex. If you make something very, very complex, very few are going to implement it. So part of what many members of ACES helped with was implementing something that was simpler. And those people aren't at ACES. The people that are making XML simpler, or making search simpler, or making indexing simpler for the most part, just aren't there. They're somewhere else. And so you get taken over by these people who want to do a 1,000,000-line triple store so that they can do linked data. Well, you know, the computer science guys are just eating our lunch. Kevin Boyack and I did a study for the IEEE. And we took 10 years of IEEE Explore. We took 10 years of the U.S. patents. And we took 10 years of Medline. And we indexed all of them automatically using my software. This was easy for us. We indexed all of them using Mesh and DTIC and the IEEE Thesaurus, which I updated. And then we visualized the results in 430 different pictures, so you can do a flip deck, you know, kind of thing. Seeing where is the industry moving, where are the edges of this science, what happens with biochemistry and engineering and biomedical kinds of things, and medical engineering, and where's the field going? Where should the IEEE, who is the client, where should they publish new journals? And where are their existing journals publishing less? Good study.
And where was it published?
Well, we gave it to the IEEE, and it wasn't published. And we actually have an article that we asked for permission to publish in ACES, in JACES, and we didn't get permission because one of the journals in the IEEE has not published on its core topic in the entire 10 years. It's published a donut hole around it, but it hasn't published on the topic. So, you know, they didn't really want that known broadly, so I'm not going to tell you what journal it was. But, you know, that's actionable intelligence for them. And I gave a report on it at Harry Collier's meeting in Nice last year, and quite a few people came up to me and asked for a similar study to be done on their stuff. So, and big companies like BASF and Bayer or Bayer, and so some pharmaceutical firms, some big German publishing firms, some French companies, and so on. So all of them are interested in that kind of capability. And, you know, that's the kind of stuff we learned at ACES. It's kind of papers that if we were hearing them at ACES, we'd probably get a lot more practitioners. There's a limited audience of academics who can spring the cash to get to ACES. And if that's all we're going to appeal to, we're going to be a shrinking organization. I mean, there's nothing wrong with our member services or member retention. Has to be based on two things. One, you have to feel fairly welcome to the group, but the other is there has to be something that you can say, I went to the meeting and I gained this, therefore it was worth the week of time as well as the expense. I don't think we're getting a lot of actionable
You
intelligence.
don't see any way to attract these folks, or could ACES do anything different?
Well, it's happening at the IA Summit. People
Yeah.
really are getting what they want. They're getting ideas for how to implement and extend their portals and their web
But
presence.
not much of that stuff is getting into JASIS, or even into the bulletin.
I think none
Get a
of
little to the
none of it's
bulletin.
getting into JASIS.
Yeah.
None of it. I don't think JASIS is seen as a vehicle for that.
Place.
It's a great international prestigious place for non-member, non-US people to publish.
Mhm, mhm.
But, I mean, if you did an analysis of the authors in ACES, and I haven't done this, but I'll bet that you would find that very few of them are actually ACES members.
Yeah, a lot of computer science folks who are
Yeah.
not members. Yeah.
And that's the other study
Yeah,
that
particularly from
Kevin and I were able to do, and he and Dick Clavins have expanded even further, and that is that information science is not where it's happening. Library science is certainly not where it's happening. Information science is eating the lunch of library science, and computer science is eating information science's lunch, because information science used to be the text guys. If it had to do with text, full text, we were it. And as you point out, people like Google have stolen that march on us. I mean, we no longer are the big guys in text retrieval. Should be. We're not.
Yeah.
We don't even invite those people to talk.
Even the text retrieval workshops, whatever you call them, you know, very few of our folks are participating in those anymore, so. So you don't see a turnaround possible? Maybe you need to do this kind of study non-proprietarily and.
I think we probably
Let's see.
need, it's been, what, 20 years since we did a strategic realignment of ACES that really involved, I think the board did one recently, because I'm no longer on the board, but I think it needs to look beyond academia and look to the people who are going to apply the stuff that we theorize about. And you got to reach out to those folks, because there's a lot of people looking for meetings. And looking for places to be a member of. And I myself am shopping, going, where have my customers gone? They're not at ACES, they're not at SLA, and I know what they're doing. They're shopping all these little meetings, like the text analytics meeting, or the Semantico meetings, or the Wilshire conferences, or the Tom Hogan meetings, Information Today meetings, although I think those have diminished. And it's a combination of things. People aren't going to meetings as much. the military librarians meeting in December, which is usually a 400-person meeting, and pretty cool. I mean, really applied intelligence has been canceled this year because government travel is so restricted. So people aren't traveling, they're looking for some other kind of venue, so everybody and their brother is given a webinar. But the ACES webinars are pretty well attended. I did 5 of them, and Joe Bush did, I think, an equal number. And those were very popular. People really signed up for them, and they were like, I don't know, I think $50 or something, a lot cheaper than,
Or many of them are free, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, you're painting a dismal picture of the
Sorry.
future.
I think if a bunch of people got together and brainstormed it, we could figure it out, but I think it needs to be, I don't know, there used to be a past president's reception at the annual meeting, which didn't happen.
Yeah, it still helps.
Did it?
I think so. I don't think it met this year, but.
Yeah, it meets intermittently now.
Oh,
And it had 2 purposes. One was to give the incoming president a notion of our support. But, you know, that was awkward, because the new kid on the block has their own agenda and their own plans, and we have no business trying to say, if you were president, you should do X, Y, and Z. Pfft, they're not going to buy that. Why should they? I mean, they've just become president. They got their own agenda. But the other thing that frequently happened at those meetings, people talk about the state of the business and ideas on how to help ACES. And since those are the people that are invested, I mean, invested at least a year, usually 3 years on the board. And in my case, I was 3 years on the board, and then I was another 3 years, and I think that's pretty common for somebody who becomes president. So you got 6 years of service to the society, so those people would have a fair idea of what to do. But so many of them now are solely academic, whereas in the past you had a lot of crossover people. People worked in the private sector, worked in the government, and also worked in academia. And we get fewer of those now. We get people that are pretty vertically integrated, which is interesting because you think information science historically has knocked down all those silos, and yet we have people who are siloing a lot.
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, this is interesting. I hate to quit, but I think, one, I better get home and cook supper, and secondly, you're worn out from talking, I'm sure.
Well, yeah, we could brainstorm a bit further, but I think this is probably a good place to wrap. Besides, I saw the bride and her new groom out there a bit ago.
Okay.
So they're upstairs somewhere.